Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Hey, it's Jordan. I wanted to share with you this Saturday the first episode of a special project that Frequency is presenting. It's the second season of Africville Forever. If you listened to the first season, or if you had a really good Canadian history teacher, you might know the story of Africville. If you don't, you really should listen to the first season because it's phenomenal and it's a really important part of our heritage. This season, though, is about rebuilding and reclaiming the heritage of Africville and making it real again. I hope you'll give it a listen. Let us know what you think.
The Africville relocation was presented as a liberal and humanitarian measure to improve the living conditions of underprivileged people. What went wrong?
You're listening to Africville Forever. In Season 1, we told you the story of the destruction of my community.
They cheated us, and I'm one that was cheated.
If you don't move at a certain time, we'll bring out the bulldozers and push your shacks over.
In Season 2, we are exploring its rebirth.
I know we'd all fight to get back out there. We still call it home.
My name is Eddie Carvery III, and my grandfather, the original Eddie Carvery, has maintained the longest civil rights protest in North American history.
It's time that we looked at them wrongs and righted them.
He stood up for Africville since it was destroyed in the 1960s, refusing to leave the land. For too long, the Africville survivors and descendants have been divided, hampering our efforts to take back the land and rebuild our unique community. So please join us as we explore practical, inclusive solutions to reunite our people and once again rebuild our community. Can we get you to end on the note of let's hear Africville Forever?
Africville forever and a day.
So we're back?
Yes, brother.
We're back.
Finally back. Back home.
All right, so let's reflect on Season 1. My question to you is, are you happy with it? And what do you think the impact of Season 1 was?
Am I happy with it? Of course. You know, I think when we set out to start the podcast, we definitely nailed what our goals were, and that was to tell the story from a different angle, to increase exposure on what really happened to the people of Africville through the voices of Africville. Since the Season 1 wrapped up, sure, the accolades all came and the mentions everywhere, but what was most important for me was going back home to Africville and hearing people talk about the podcast and how thankful that they were that we were sharing this story from a new generation, a new perspective, right? So, hammer on the nail, you know, we did what we set out to do, but we knew that wasn't the end, and that's why we're back.
You know, I think what was so cool is I remember being on the land after the podcast came out. I remember being on the land multiple times, and people who were visiting would come up and be like, hey, I listened to the podcast, and you know what I mean? Without even knowing that, you know, I was a co-host or you were a co-host, they'd be like, I heard about this podcast. And
it almost brought them there.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like they had a connection to this place that maybe they didn't have before. Like the connection was deeper, and it almost convinced them to like come check it out. And
I
see
think that's what made it special, because, you know, our goal was to increase awareness, but what we did was exactly that, you know, whether it was somebody reaching out to us, asking us questions for an interview, or that final point, somebody making their way to Africville and being like captivated, not by the land only, but by what they heard from the podcast. They could picture it and put the pieces together, and that, you know, for me, that's special.
Yeah. What impact did it have on you? What do you think in terms of the impact it had on you and your family or the people around you?
I mean, to be honest, man, for me, personally, myself, it was a start of what I needed. It furthered my own belief in what I was capable of, now that I could go back and enter into rooms that my people weren't able to and speak the real message. It gave me the confidence to elevate my fight for my people. So, you know, I'm thankful to Podstarter, I'm thankful to Rogers, I'm thankful to Tribe, I'm thankful to you, and I'm thankful to each and every one of my ancestors, man.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, I mean, you know, locally and nationally, I think the podcast garnered a lot of attention.
For sure.
Right? It led to being one of Amazon's best podcast of 2022.
Yeah.
You know, we had over 80% completion rate. That's crazy.
Yeah, that is. That
For people listening,
they either like the story or they like your voice.
A little bit of both.
For
maybe.
sure, man, for sure. God love the Honorable Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. You know, a proud moment was that Africville Forever actually got to be mentioned in the Senate on the floor. And that was huge.
Yeah.
Right? That was huge for me. My whole life, my grandfather has, you know, respected, admired her work and what she's done, so it's only natural that I look up to her, and I always have.
It kind of opened my eyes to, like, there is the power in storytelling.
Yeah.
And that whatever we did worked. You know what I mean? And it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it just motivated me even more to be like, okay, we can't stop. We're going to have to look at season 2. We're going to have to provide an update. We're going to have to bring more people on to share how do we get justice for what happened at Africville. And back to the question of the impact that this podcast had, like, I do think this is a medium that has allowed decision makers and people in power to also listen, and their kids are listening. You know what I mean? Like, their family members are listening. I know that shortly after the podcast was released, I believe the Prime Minister actually visited Africville.
Yeah.
And, you know, we won't get into too much of that, but at least he's showing up.
Oh, for sure.
At least he's showing up. And, you know, I think we're probably doubling down on season 2 to share more about solutions and a path forward. And I do think this will have an impact, and this will continue to have an impact such that something great comes out of this outside of just people listening and learning.
Yeah.
I truly do believe that in the next 5 years, we will see something special happen at Africville. And I think
my brother, it already is.
It's happening. No, you're right. It's happening.
You got to understand, right? Like, you said those things, and yes, that's great, but guess what? The community is healing.
Yeah.
There's been, you know, a targeted attempt to separate the community since its destruction and its demise, but we're healing. You said, you know, what this podcast has done. Well, even from me being an observer through my grandfather's fight and seeing the separation of my people, we're coming back together.
Mm-hmm.
After the podcast, I took a journey to the port. I went right to the top. You were there with me when we did the report, and then I came on as a contractor for them to try to do something great. And in my time there, not only did I, you know, get to travel across the province to a lot of local Black communities, but what I was able to do for Africville was astounding. So we have, you know, the Port of Halifax, which probably is the largest contributor to our economic development. And in their acknowledgements, alongside the Indigenous peoples and communities, they actually were acknowledging the land of Africville as a sacred place, right? So that was big. I got to bring the Walk Through Africville exhibit right down to the cruise operations center, right? And so you can see that the Heritage Trust now was involved. So not only were we making positive things happen, but we were mending relationships. We were saying we got to put the nonsense aside. If we really want to be what we strive to be for our people, we can't do it alone. We have to do it together. And so for me, that was a big thing going into season 1. I acknowledged, you know, that separation, but I also wanted to see that healing. So when I was able to contribute to it, man, nothing feels better. You can't replace that. And so this season, you know, it's my hope, and I know you're aligned with me in this, is to reach out to experts from not only the province or the country, maybe international, people who have gone through similar situations and found a way to the other side. And then we're going to have conversations with them on how, you know, we could possibly use what they have learned and make that to the benefit of the people of Africville. And again, I think it's really important for people to understand, not even just Black Canadians, Black Nova Scotians, African Nova Scotians, if we can solve this problem of Africville through, you know, direct action, it's good for all of Canadians. You know, Canada itself loves to boast and brag about being an inclusive place there, or they like to chirp in their 2 cents of what's going on in the Middle East or in Europe, wherever the case may be, and they got skeletons buried in their own backyard. Well, it's unfortunate, but let's dig them up, have those conversations, find a way forward, and then that way as a country we can heal together.
in season 2, we definitely want to bring the voice of the community to the conversation, to the table still, right? But I believe that, and we've talked about this, like having experts who have been able to deal with land settlements in other regions of the world, being able to bring them to this place to learn about the story and to share what they've done, and, you know, for all of us to learn as listeners and as you know, people in this together, take from that and realize what we can do to apply those learnings into the Africville project. And so I think that's probably going to be the biggest, when you talk about building an action plan, we need people who have experience in getting the action plan executed, done. You know what I mean? Like they've succeeded.
The planning, they've gone through.
And I think that's probably going to be the thing that a lot of the listeners are going to get out of this upcoming season is, you've heard the stories, and if you haven't, go to season 1 and listen to the stories of the people who had family at Africville, grew up at Africville, were affected by what happened there. And then come back to season 2, because that's when you're going to learn, what do we do? And how do we get this land back? And how do we empower these people?
From season 1, that was, you know, one of the main things that we were getting all the time. How can we help? What can we do? So it's only right that we put this plan in action for season 2 to almost answer that question for people. Take them on this journey with us, because it's not going to stop until it's solved. Just a little update on where I've been recently. You know, my grandfather did have a stroke. He lost vision in his left eye. He has been re-diagnosed with cancer. So it's, you know, it's a difficult position for me, but I can't pity-patter around anymore. You know, all this talk, that's what it's always been. How many times has city council gone in that room and had discussions about Africville, and absolutely nothing has changed? You know what I mean? It's time for action, because when I was in those rooms, it all sounded good and gravy until it was time to actually do something. And then it was, oh, we're not ready. You know, pardon my French, but it's not important if you're ready. My people have been dying to get what they deserve for the past 400 years.
Yeah.
So why are we waiting on you to be ready? You're never going to be ready. You're going to make mistakes. People are going to get hurt. But that's how you progress. That's how you move forward.
Awesome. So we've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and to this series, Africville Forever. We're so grateful for all the listeners out there who are leaning in to learn and who are sharing this with friends, with family, with people that they think can, you know, do something and join this fight. If you're interested in learning more about Africville Forever and participating, you can find us online at africvilleforever.ca, and you can also find us on social media at Africville Forever. We encourage you to share, we encourage you to listen, and we encourage you to keep the fight of Africville alive forever.
Big thank you to all of the listeners, and, you know, personally myself, all I can ask is that you keep coming with an open mind and an open heart, and we grow together. And it's been a journey so far, but the journey's far from over. We have, you know, continued our socials. Everything stayed the same. We've been preparing you guys for season 2, and I hope you're ready to come along on this ride with us as we try to solve the problem of Africville. Here's a little bit of what you can expect in the coming episodes.
According to Eminent Domain and African Americans, a 2007 report for the Institute of Justice, it states that between 1949 and 1973, 2,532 projects were carried out in 992 cities that displaced 1 million people, 2/3 of which were Black people.
They had lost their sense of community. They had lost the social cohesion. They hadn't practiced their usual, traditional spiritual practices.
I'm not here for recognition. And just like my grandfather, you may hear some request of, you know, acknowledgement for the sacrifices he made. I'm here to speak for the community.
One of the biggest things when you decide to go, okay, well, I'm going to go into policing, a lot of people are like, well, you're going to policing. I guess we ain't cool no more.
Yeah, did you get cut off? Like, were they...
Yeah.
Right, yeah?
Yeah, people that you wouldn't think were cut off would be like, oh, well, I guess I'm cut off.